In and out. We calm our mind into a deep peace. And then let's do a short refuge prayer. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of all sentient beings. So today we are on chapter 12 in the text, and this deals with the second training on the path of Tantra, and specifically the meditation. Now, there are several chapters that deal with this because it's a very complex issue when we get to Tantra, the different levels and different types of things that are part of that. No way we could cover everything, but we will talk about what the key elements, as we have been in the other areas. And so we begin here with the preliminary practices called ngondro. So as noted earlier, these practices are taught as preliminary to other practices, and they are very foundation for all that follows that. These are very important. I do these practices every day as a part of my regular meditation. It doesn't take a whole lot of time, but in the beginning we spend more time dealing with that. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. So many in the West treat them lightly in order to move on to the sexier advanced practices. There is a lot of resistance to the commitment traditionally required, or perhaps silence about whether it has actually even been done. So ngondro is divided into major parts. The first is known as the four thoughts that turn the mind, or the common ngondro. So these are the sufferings of samsara. So this was one of the key points of what the Buddha was talking about. In our lives, we have all of these different forms of suffering that occurs to us. And how do we deal with that? How do we become liberated from those? And that was really the primary focus of the Buddha. And so the second one then is that we have this precious human life. And the fact that we have this precious human life is part of what gives us the opportunity to achieve liberation. The third one is impermanence and death. And so one of the issues that we have here is that everything is impermanent. A lot of times some of the principles and some of the philosophical views look at everything as being permanent. But the Buddha said, no, these are not permanent. Everything is impermanent. And then also death. We are all going to die. We need to accept that. It can be very frightening to people, but it doesn't have to be. And then number 4 is karma and reincarnation. So karma basically means actions, as we've talked about previously. And so the way that it is used, however, becomes modified to just one part of actions. Those are the kind of actions that have negative consequences. And the reincarnation has to do with karma, because if we get rid of those negative forms of karma, then that is what enables us to achieve liberation. And oftentimes what we're talking about in terms of that form of karma are habits, and in particular, bad habits. And so the practice is, largely speaking, the process of getting rid of bad habits and replacing them with good habits, things that come from our practice. So the second part is the uncommon ngondro. These are a more advanced form of practice, which includes first refuge prayer and prostration. So there's a short prayer, there's variations of that, but we'll do that. So prayer, and it traditionally is done with prostrations. And that part is a offering of recognition that we are subsidiary to the ultimate form of things. And so we bow down, if you will, and we traditionally do it laying completely down on the floor. But if you're not able to do that, there are other ways to do that as well. You can do it sitting, or you can do it to your hands and knees, and so forth. And we'll talk more about that later on. And then the second one is the bodhicitta practices. So we actually touched on those in the last part of our course, looking at the bodhisattva approach. And so we'll incorporate those into these practices. And then the Vajrasattva, number 3, Vajrasattva purification practice. So Vajrasattva is a particular figure that is associated with this idea of purification. And there is a prayer, it's a fairly long one, that we typically do to go through various kinds of things and asking, and we'll go through the details of this because it's a little bit complicated, but then we can go to a very simple version to do it on a regular daily basis after we've become very familiar with that and the meaning of it and how it works and so forth. The fourth one is mandala offerings. And so we are making offerings as a part of this as well. Conceptually, what we're doing is we're making offerings to all of the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas as a part of that, thanking them for what they have done in order to enable us to achieve liberation. And number 5 is Guru Yoga, which is linked primarily with Padmasambhava. And so it is a part of that. We recognize him in particular because he is recognized within Tibet as being the second Buddha, having brought Buddhism to Tibet. Now, we know historically he didn't actually bring it to Tibet. It had been in Tibet for 100 years or more prior to that time, but he is considered a symbolic representation of that, and that's what the importance is here. So let's begin with the 4 thoughts that turn the mind. The common preliminaries. The 4 thoughts that turn the mind are contemplations on the suffering of samsara, as I mentioned, the precious human life, the impermanence and death, and karma and reincarnation. So the primary purpose for contemplating these 4 thoughts is a motivation for us to do the practices for training the mind. And that's really a good description of the process that we go through, articulated by the Buddha, is training our mind. And that's what these practices are all about. They are, to some degree, fear-based, and you can argue numerous more positive reasons for doing these kinds of practices, and we'll refer to some of those as well. But that was a part of the culture, is trying to address the fear that people had. We don't have as much fear in our culture, but certainly we do have some. We see a lot of that going on these days. Nevertheless, there is some value in contemplating these thoughts. And at a very minimum, they are such fundamental concepts within the tradition of which you need at least a basic understanding and experience to understand and appreciate the more advanced preliminary practices. So there is a reason, a rationale involved in the steps that we are taking all the way through the material in this text, but particularly in this case related to these preliminary practices. So these may be assigned by the Lama for a period of 1 to 3 months. One begins with a period of focus on the 4 thoughts, such as the words of my perfect teacher or a 100-day ngondro retreat. There's various ways that this is done. So the first one is the suffering of samsara. The first noble truth is discontent or suffering of samsara. So I describe the principle of suffering and different forms of suffering in chapter 2 of this book. So it may be helpful to review those before continuing. In brief, these include all forms of physical pain and mental anguish that we may experience. Number 2, the suffering of change, whether it's wanted or not. Sometimes it's something that we want and we don't get. Other times it's something that we don't want and we do get. That results in a sense of suffering. And then number 3 is all pervasive suffering. It's a very general concept of discontent with the way things appear. So there are 6 poisons or realms of suffering that are also common in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition. The first one is anger. A lot of people get angry, and so we need to overcome that if we are to be able to attain this sense of liberation. The second one is greed, which is very common in our culture. Want, gotta have this, gotta have that, and so forth. Constant ads on television and in newspapers and all kinds of things like that. And they're trying to get us to want things that we don't necessarily need. And then number 3 is ignorance. If we don't really understand the true nature of things, we get caught up in all of this culture. So we need to have some understanding of what's really going on as a part of this. And that was described by the Buddha himself. And then the 4th one is desire, particularly lust. Now, lust we typically think of in our culture as related to sex, which it may be, but there's all kinds of lust, which is very closely associated and related to the idea of greed as well. So we lust after a new car, or we lust after a new house, or other kinds of things that are out there. And then number 5 is jealousy. Sometimes when other people get things that we want, we become jealous of them. And so that's also a part of what we need to pay attention to and overcome. And finally, the 6th one is pride or arrogance. Stick our nose up in the air and we're better than others are. And what we do have, we have more of or whatever. And so that also gets in the way of our liberation. So those 6, anger, greed, ignorance, desire, jealousy, and pride or arrogance. There are other lists, of course, from the Buddhist teachings that include these further detailed into a list of 52 afflictive emotions that causes our suffering. Now, we're not going to go through all of those because these are enough. These cover those things in most ways as nuances in different kinds of things. And understanding of this principle is central to all of Buddhism. Coarse forms of discontent are obvious, but there are much more subtle forms that cause many of the problems in our lives. And so part of what we're trying to do is train our mind, as I mentioned, to recognize these things when we're experiencing them, when we are tempted to experience them, and so forth. We become much more sensitive to these. So the more we understand that, the better we're able to deal with those experiences without getting caught up in them and remaining above the fray, so to speak. So first, practice number 13 is the suffering of samsara. So typically we do this 1 hour daily for 1 week or smaller multiple times during the day, as much as you are able to do it. And part of it involves setting your intention, as we've talked about before. You can either set the standard one that is in the text, or you can set one that's specific for your own needs. And then recite the refuge prayer, typically done 3 times, similar to what we did when we just started here today. Then sit in stillness of body, speech, and mind. And then we do the main practice, which is as follows. Lament. Samsara is the causes of suffering. Nirvana is liberation. Then ponder the sufferings of cyclic existence as just mentioned moments ago. Develop the sense of renunciation and samsara. So we're renouncing these things, and a desire to practice to be liberated from these causes of suffering. You're not going to get there unless you're committed to actually doing it. Then imagine your spiritual guide, your Lama or other teacher, appears before you as the body of light and says, "Samsara is like a fire pit. Many are suffering. Please come. I will take you from the sufferings of samsara." Light comes from his head to your heart and lifts you up and out of the pit of samsara. So this is a symbolic kind of a representation. It's not a literal kind of thing that happens. But this is one of many different ways that this is described. But you look back and you see the suffering of your mothers, your friends, etc., and feel great compassion for them. So light radiates out from your heart, and you bring them along one by one until you bring all of them with you. So this is a ritual kind of a practice that we go through, and imagine us doing those kind of things, which helps train us in our mind as well as our heart for other beings. So it's not just about us, it's also about all other beings. At the end, you recite, "By the merit of this practice, may I attain liberation for the benefit of all sentient beings." And we do that 3 times. So post-meditation, continually reflect on these sufferings day and night until disillusionment arises. So we're disillusion of all of these kind of experiences, and you feel the need for Dharma. So look for examples going on in your life each day, as well as the lives of others, that you notice those happening. So that's the first of this set of preliminary practices. The next one is the precious human life. Now, traditionally, you would only do one of these in a particular day. And so you can do that. It's often a good thing to do in the beginning. You do one of these regularly for a period of time, and then you do the second one for a period of time, and so forth. And eventually you bring them all together. But these are really short practices. And so it is very possible to do them sequentially all together. And so I've combined them here as opposed to the way that they're described in the book, which is to do them for a week apiece and then continue on. So the second one is the precious human life. While some people believe that they exist as a part of some divine plan, the scientific evidence for our physical existence is actually quite amazing. The odds of human existence as species through the process of evolution are incalculably small. The odds of atoms in our bodies ending up on this planet, of all the zillions of stars in this particular universe, are even more incalculable. So the mathematics involved in trying to calculate the possibilities here are just infinitesimally tiny. And then the Buddhist tradition tells the story of a blind turtle living in the bottom of the ocean. It comes to the surface only once every 100 years. On the surface, tossed about by wind and waves, is a yolk. The odds of attaining a precious human life are said to be the same as the odds of that blind turtle coming to the surface and poking his head through the yolk. You can imagine. The oceans cover about 2/3 of our planet. And so imagine that and trying to have some place in the yolk, the blind odds of coming out that's very, very tiny, very similar to what we see in science in terms of our evolution for that. So even if we choose to ignore those odds, consider the odds from your planetary ancestors. Using a very conservative estimate of only 191,000 years for the origin of modern man and a great generation approximately every 20 years, that's 2,250 generations. A woman releases one mature egg each month during her fertile life. In today's lifespans, that could be roughly 500 eggs, though numbers decline later in life. However, in ancient times, much shorter life expectancies might produce 300 eggs instead of 500. Optimistically, the odds of a particular egg that produced your body are 1 in 2,850,000. Okay, so pretty tiny eggs, and that's just from your parents. Okay. On the other side, the male sperm production varies considerably, using the estimate of 6 million healthy sperm every ejaculation, and assuming an average of 2 ejaculations per week over an average ancient lifespan, we get odds of approximately 1 in, I can't even say the number, it's 20 and then 3 sets of 3 zeros, okay? So very, very tiny. And then combining with that the odds of the egg, that is the odds that a particular sperm and a particular egg would meet at that particular time, are approximately 1 in 5,700, 3 zeros, 3 zeros, 3 zeros, 3 zeros. It's really, really tiny. It's 5.7 quadrillion. And those odds ignore most of the history of life on this planet, not to mention the 14 billion years or so leading up to the beginning of life on this planet. So whether you look at it from the point of view of the Buddhist story of this, or whether you look at it from the probability based on science, the odds of us being here right now is really tiny. But that is just part of the story. For this life to be truly precious from the Buddhist point of view, we must also have a good fortune of the opportunity to practice. The advantages of being born human in a place where Dharma is taught, and us having the necessary sense faculties, intention, and faith. In addition, we must be born in an average, with the advantage of a particular teacher with great compassion who is teaching the Dharma, and where we have the time and resources to practice, among many other factors. So we have this opportunity. So that's a big part of the precious human life. Not all beings have had that, or even today, a lot of people do not have that opportunity. The point is that this human existence is extraordinarily rare and most precious. Few of us truly appreciate just how fortunate we are. And in the history of time, this life is but a flash of lightning. Every second of every day is of immeasurable value, and yet we tend to fritter it away without regard to how extraordinarily fortunate we are to even be alive. Nor do we know how much longer we have. It may go on for years, and it may end in an instant. Knowing this, you must think about what is the best use of the little precious time that you actually have. One approach is to cram as much living into these moments as possible, known as hedonism. This focuses on your self-interest, sometimes some of your family or friends as well. Another way is to give whatever you can for the benefit of others. This is the altruistic approach. So make donations, or we work in a food bank or someplace else to help those who are suffering even more so than we may be. The choice, with a range of possibilities in between, is up to each of us. It is a question of what is important to us, what we value. If we seek happiness only for ourselves, we will make the first choice. But if we seek a higher purpose, particularly one that also benefits others, then we will make that latter choice. So why seek a higher purpose? In a perfect world, there would be no need to even consider this question. However, we live in a far from perfect world. So one of the things that you might notice if you have studied Buddhism and different stories and different practices and so forth, quite a few of them are actually just focus on you. And they don't embody that bigger picture and the need to help with others. But the only way that you can actually completely master yourself is to do it in such a way that you are also benefiting others. So I often say that we seek a state of peace, calm, contentment, but then also as a part of that, loving kindness, compassion, and altruistic intention to benefit others. So those are the two wings of the bird, if you will. Can't fly with just one wing. So the actual practice, again, this one for precious human life, we contemplate this for 1 hour daily for 1 week. Sessions may be divided into smaller multiple times each day again. And the intention, our standard one, if I do this practice for the benefit of all sentient beings or some other personal intention. And then recite the mantra, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent for the benefit of, or to enable all sentient beings to attain liberation. And again, you can substitute that if you have another one from a different source that you like. That's also acceptable. Usually, we customarily repeat it 3 times. And then we sit in stillness of body, speech, and mind. So we're creating that sense of mental and physical calm. Focus on the rise and fall of your abdomen as you breathe. And then the formal part of the practice, we say, this precious human life is just for now. If I cannot practice Dharma now, it will be very difficult later. It is not enough that I have attained a human rebirth, for countless others have yet they live a life of suffering. I feel great compassion. Then ponder the odds against attaining this human life, the blind turtle or the statistical odds. Reflect on that for a little while. And then meditate on the sufferings of the lower 3 realms that we mentioned. And then the anger that manifests the hell realms, anger, hate, or the greed that manifests in the hungry ghost realm, greed, which is never enough. Or to feel the ignorance that manifests in the animal realm, the ignorance of killing or being abused. And then extend your contemplation to the 3 upper realms. Here, feel a sense of desires that manifest in the human realm, desire and craving for things. And feel the jealousy that manifests in the demigod realm, jealousy. And finally, feel the pride or arrogance that manifests in the God realm, the arrogance associated with that. Then imagine that your spiritual guide appears above you as before and says, alas, the attainment of a human life is leisure and endowment which is difficult to find, has been obtained. However, it is not permanent. If something of great significance is not accomplished now, it will be very difficult to attain later. At the end, recite again, by the merit of this practice, may I attain liberation for the benefit of all sentient beings 3 times. And then post-meditation, in this way, contemplate continuously on having obtained a precious human birth. So the idea here is we go about doing things during the day, doing our job, working, meeting with other people, and so forth. Keep thinking about it, this precious human life and the value of this precious human life. And what can I do with it? Not only to benefit myself, but others as well. So that brings us then to the third aspect here, impermanence and death. So everything changes. That's the bottom line. Nothing is the same. The only thing permanent is change. We have all heard these and many more similar statements. In the West, change is generally accepted as the way things are. So why is this such a big deal? Are we just more conscious of change than the ancients? Perhaps. But recall that training the mind is about changing our worldview, the way we see and understand and experience things. So how many of us are continuously aware of change? Do you even think about it regularly? The idea of contemplating impermanence is so that it becomes a more constant part of the way that we see things. Recall that these 4 thoughts are about increasing our motivation to practice. So when we become fully aware of the impermanence of the world, of life, we are more likely to take the advantage of the precious opportunity that we have to practice and really make a difference in our precious human life and the lives of others. Precious human life. So we can begin by reflecting on things like changes in nature, the seasons, day and night, birth and death, the weather, and so forth. There's lots of natural things that happen in our life every day. Just notice them. And then we can reflect on our relationships with other individuals. Today we have new friends who we did not even know a few years ago. Other friends have gone away and we are no longer in contact with them. In other cases, our relationships may still exist, but they have their ups and downs, conflicts and resolutions and so forth. The food we eat, the air we breathe, come and go. On a larger scale, buildings are constructed, but later torn down. Even mountains and canyons come and go, though more slowly compared to the lifetime here, it becomes almost unnoticeable. By contemplating these countless other changes we see every day, we become more sensitive to impermanence. Then we turn it inward and we reflect on our own impermanence. Some of the traditional contemplations include a 3x3 contemplations. First, we focus on the impermanence of life. I will definitely die. Think about that. A lot of people don't want to think about that, but it's part of the practice that's very important. And then the time of death is uncertain. You never know when it's going to happen. You might have read recently on statistics of average lifespan, which has been increasing recently, ever since COVID, during which it was going down. But because of having overcome that through vaccinations and so forth, not completely, but at least cut back a lot, it's continuing to grow. But we still don't know when it's going to happen. My mother-in-law just recently died at the age of 96. That's a fairly long life. I even had an aunt who died at 111. That's really, really long. But other people have died at much shorter times. My mother, for example, died at 86. So there's a wide variety, and I've known people, a family that I knew in Oregon who had a baby, and the baby had some kind of a problem with the heart. They did surgery, and it died. Okay, so it was only alive for maybe a month. So there's this wide range of possibilities. We just never know for sure. If you watch the news, you see all kinds of things like that happening. There will be no help when death comes. Okay? We're on our own at that point. Now, doctors may be trying to keep us from dying and so forth. And family oftentimes can also come and try to help us and so forth. But the help that we get when we're dying is eventually gone. We can't help other people in that sense. So the second 3 of these are the reasons for certainty of death. There is no one from the past who is alive. Okay? Everybody that at some point has died. This body is composite, and all composite things are perishable. So think about it. If it's impermanent, by definition, it's not going to last forever. And even things that we tend to think of as long and unperishable, like mountains and so forth, eventually wear out as well. Life is becoming exhausted in every moment. So we contemplate those three factors as well. So the next part of the practice is number 15, impermanence and death. So we take refuge and sit in the stillness of body, speech, and mind. The text recommends going to a remote region, a terrifying place such as a charnel ground or cemetery, or imagine such a place, and an awareness of impermanence will arise automatically. And then we reflect on that location, now, whether it's an actual location in which we are or one that we are imagining. And then we say, all things are impermanent. There is no time to waste. And if you can, and you have sufficient privacy, you can actually say that out loud. It has a little bit more meaning when we say things like that out loud than when we just say them in our mind. And then ponder the changing seasons, the changes in day and night, changes in our lives as we grow old and die. Will I die today? Tomorrow? The time of death is uncertain, so there is no time to waste. I will use this precious opportunity to pursue liberation for the benefit of all beings. Then imagine that you are about to die. You will be separated from your friends, family, possessions, and so forth, never to see them again. You can say out loud, "Oh dear, death is approaching. I will go alone. I am afraid." Then imagine that your spiritual guide, appearing above you on a lotus and a moon disk seat, says, "This life swiftly passes by like a stream flowing down a steep mountain. There is no time to waste." As soon as you hear these words, you regret not having practiced the Dharma and generate faith and devotion. Instantly light rays from the spiritual mentor's heart lift you up. Then incalculable rays of light emanate from your heart and bring every single sentient being out of their delusion. Cultivate great compassion for all sentient beings. In this way, meditate continuously on impermanence and death. And then we recite, "By the merit of this practice, may I attain liberation for the benefit of all sentient beings," 3 times. And for post-meditation, just continue to think about the impermanence and death as you go about activities during the day. Then the fourth one of this, and once again, these 4 are often done separately from each other over a period of time. But in this case, you can combine them together. I think most of us are fairly familiar, even though it may not be in this particular context, but the principles, the ideas, that we're fairly familiar with them. So I think combining them into a single practice, if you have that, like if you have a whole hour to do it, it's pretty easy to do all of those at one time. Otherwise, you might need to break it into some smaller parts. You could break it into doing one early in the morning, one later coffee break, one at lunch, and then one in the afternoon or evening. There's different ways that it can be arranged, whatever is comfortable and works well for you and your time frame. So number 4 is the karma and reincarnation. Karma simply means action. Usually it is intentional action is the way that it's more often referred to. So karma is the result of our actions in that case. Many people believe in the law of karma as it became known. This law in modern parlance says what goes around comes around, kind of a reciprocity, if you will. More fundamentally, it refers to the complex chain of events of cause and effect that impact our lives in so many ways. Our actions create effects. According to karma, the effects of our actions come back to us in some way, in this life, a future life, or in some life beyond this material reality. Beneficial actions come back to us in a beneficial way. Harmful actions come back to us in a harmful way. Now, agency is a term based on our brain structure, leading us to believe purposeful things happen for reasons, creating narratives where the action is said to lead to predictable outcomes. The self-fulfilling prophecy illustrates how we tend to expect good from doing good, or the reverse of that. And behavioral reinforcement is when actions result in a chain of similar effects back. And there's many more. So, of course, we often see this in our own lives and in the lives of others. This is the reason for pursuing ethical or wholesome behavior and avoiding harmful or unwholesome behavior. However, there are times when we see or experience bad things happening to good people, or good things benefiting bad people. How can this happen? If our karma, we do good things, how could anything bad happen to us? Or if we do bad things, how could anything really good happen to us? Most religious traditions either express them as being beyond human understanding, that is, part of the spiritual realm, often articulated as part of God's plan, or they relate it to the law of karma as being a function of our actions in this life or in a prior life. This gets particularly complicated in that this perspective also necessitates that you have a sufficient store of good karma to have been born as a human being in this lifetime. How then do these bad things happen to humans good enough to have been born as humans? What's the logic here? The usual answer is that it's very complex, too difficult to understand and explain. Just a cop-out, if you will. Others explain that unrealized seeds of bad karma can still be carried forward in our storehouse or alaya consciousness, while the realized seeds of good karma enable us to attain a human rebirth. You also find descriptions of contrary consequences of good and bad actions should you experience a particular combination of good and bad actions. This is further complicated by conditions, circumstances that are said to enable these seeds to sprout or manifest, but that science says are, at least for the most part, beyond our control, beyond our actions. One example is the 40% solution from research showing that we have actually control over only about 40% of our actions and their consequences. These complexities are impossible to reconcile through any ordinary rational conceptualizations. As a practical matter, it is helpful to understand 4 criteria for creating negative karma. And in this, all 4 of these must occur for the full effect of karma to actually take place. They are, number 1, intending to do the action. And there's a number of sources referred to as coming from the Buddha, who said that intention is the key of karma. Just because you do something, if you hurt somebody accidentally or something, you're not going to accrue negative karma for that. But if you did it intentionally, that's when you're going to. So then, the second one is doing the action. So if you have the intention to do it, then you actually do it. Then the third one is attaining the desired result. So you try to do it and it doesn't result in the cause or the result of that cause, then it still doesn't have negative effect. And then rejoicing, or at least not regretting the action. So those are 4 principles that are often referred to as a part of what really is necessary to achieve negative karma. Okay? So you'll find if you dig deeply into Buddhist teachings and so forth that not everybody agrees the same methods and so forth as a part of that. But this is one that I was taught as a part of this view. And I have also read in many sources that the intention is the key. So continuing on then from this list, it is clear that it is not that easy to create negative karma, and accordingly there is little need to fear creating negative karma. It's not that there are no negative effects from doing less than these 4, but it is not nearly as serious as often stated. However, the worst actions are considered to be the 5 heinous crimes. This is a separate list. Number 1, to kill your father. Number 2, to kill your mother. Number 3, to kill an arhat or a Buddha. And number 4, to divide the Sangha. So the Sangha group of practitioners that do something to split that up. And then 5, to injure a Buddha. Now, in number 3, where I said to kill an arhat or a Buddha, an arhat is said to be a Buddha. But notice that it is a lowercase there. And so to injure a Buddha, the number 5 would be the Buddha, or some other version of the Buddha, so to speak. Each of these is said to result in an intermediate reincarnation of the hell realm. I have personally been in a Sangha that was divided twice by different lamas, although I refused to participate in those. And this rule is one of the reasons that I refused to participate. We continue to do well, though there was later a decline due to COVID. Another way to look at karma is as a habit. Each time you engage in a particular action, it creates a neural pathway in the brain. When you repeat that action, it becomes stronger until eventually it becomes habitual. You lie once and feel bad about it. You lie again and it becomes easier. Eventually you become a habitual liar. The Buddhist terms, you have strengthened and seed karma, you will experience the ramifications of those actions at some point in this life for a future incarnation. From a Western point of view, it seems that though the cause and effect are clearly evident, it is not necessarily purposeful in nature. Scientists note that there is a significant level of chaos within the apparent order of the universe. While there are clearly laws or guiding principles involved, there are also certain randomness that transcends these laws or principles. As noted above, some argue that these are not mere chance, they are just beyond our understanding or part of God's plan. Perhaps, but this appears more accurately to be a process of mere mortals' rationalization. Similarly, you would argue that that to ascribe such randomness to unknown seeds of karma appears to have been derived from similar rationalization processes. It appears that while the laws of karma have some validity, they are not prescriptive. Karma indeed describes the psychosocial phenomena. What goes around tends to come around. But karma, even in Buddhism, is not absolute in nature. It is relative. And that's something that gets pointed out sometimes, but not very often to people. And we divide in our philosophical views in Buddhism of the relative and the ultimate. But
the ultimate does not include that kind of thing. It's only in the relative. So it is like all of the phenomena in the material realm, impermanent, which the Buddha and countless teachers since then have said is actually a factual existence of nature. So His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, has made similar comments several years ago regarding catastrophic natural disasters. He has said that while this involves natural causes and effects, it has nothing to do with the karma of those affected, although not all Buddhists disagree with him. I do. Karma is of cause and effect, the nature of change, another way that we can think of it. Change is how we experience the impermanent and interdependent nature of material reality. In many cases, there is a cyclic nature to change. We see it in a day and night, in seasons and so forth. We note patterns in birth, growth, maturing, aging, dying. These forms of change have led us to recognize a pattern of rebirth. In human terms, we have often extended it into our conceptualizations of future rebirths in the human realm, a spiritual realm such as a heaven or perhaps a hell realm. But the change often follows a pattern beyond a cyclical one. We note that one event is caused by another, which is caused by another, and so forth, to the beginning of time. If even there was such a beginning, cause and effect. Much of science is grounded in learning the nature of these causes and effects in the material world, whether in the hard sciences such as physics and chemistry, or in the soft sciences such as psychology and sociology. We have learned and benefited in innumerable ways from this learning. Of course, we have also sometimes suffered consequences of causes and effects that we do not fully understand at the time. For my students who express some doubt about karma, I tell them that it's all right to doubt as long as you behave as if it's true. So I think it can be a principle that we can put into effect when we look at it in that way. Thus, the acceptance of our behaviors have consequences. That's an important concept in the Buddhist worldview. Our awareness and sensitivity to this view helps motivate us toward both ethical, wholesome behavior and sense of urgency to practice given this precious human life. So we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, if you will. There are some principles involved here in these teachings, whether you believe them literally or you believe them symbolically, that can be very meaningful to us and our practice. The second concept included here is the practice of reincarnation. So this is a belief in some form of consciousness, the alaya consciousness, usually described in Tibetan Buddhism, is recycled through the process of rebirth into another sentient being over and over until we attain liberation. Reincarnation is usually described as our past, present, or future, yet the description only refers to alaya consciousness being reborn into a new body. If our consciousness is moved to another body, that is no longer our body. According to the Buddha, there is no self. In some sutras, the Buddha only refers to rebirth moment to moment in this life. So no, not from a life to a life, but changes in this life itself. Buddhist philosophers have tried to come up with a successful alternative, the closest of which is our Buddha nature or alaya consciousness, neither of which include a body element, sometimes asserted in reincarnation stories. I leave you to decide, or not. I'm agnostic about it, so don't take a committed view one way or the other. The principle can be helpful to guiding our actions, regardless of whether it is literally true or not. And that, I think, is the underlying principle here. We look at that and the effect, and we follow the guiding activities based on the principle. The Buddhist idea is that this alaya consciousness carries seeds of karma until all are exhausted or purified. Because of this, we are bound to experience an inherent unhappiness with life over and over and over unless we make a choice to pursue a path to liberation. Thus, karma and reincarnation are interrelated and interdependent. As one of my students noted, it's not me that reincarnates, it is my alaya consciousness, and this means that I am responsible for the karmic seeds of someone else. Now think about that. I and some masters would agree based on the way that it has been described. Scientists, of course, doubt reincarnation. No one has been able to validate claims of previous lives, which somehow seem mostly be some earlier famous person. However, recall of previous lives seem to be more likely very early in life. In other words, it's usually young children that have some kind of recollection of another life, not those of us who are a bit older. And unfortunately, babies can't talk. Nevertheless, Eon Stevenson from the University of Virginia attempted to validate such experiences among children by carefully analyzing their memories, even checking birthmarks and birth defects, as if reincarnation includes some form of bodily transference. It's not said to be included. And then to match with evidence of the person these children claimed to have been in their previous life. While he was able to document a very few cases that could not easily be accounted for through other means, the studies remain anecdotal in nature. Later, his doctoral student, Jim Tucker, attempted to further validate these findings in Return to Life, which somewhat similar results. So the studies that have been done attempting to try and do this do not give us any clear validation, which is what we need to have from a scientific point of view to say, yes, this is the way that it is. So no means has yet been identified by which the alaya consciousness could physically leave the deceased and enter a new incarnation. Thus, His Holiness the Dalai Lama himself has said that until science can disprove reincarnation, which is also not yet done, we should continue to assume that it does happen. Of course, science can't prove what is not true, only what is true, or thought to be at the time. Thus, such a scientific discovery disproving reincarnation is not going to happen. So that's one of the problems with the, very highly regard for the Dalai Lama about his commitment to science and the value of science in our practices as well. But the idea doesn't fit the methodology of science in that sense. Continuing on here, then, the Buddha seems to have been a very practical man. He questioned and challenged many of the beliefs and cultural standards of this time and place, and he apparently refused to respond to several metaphysical questions posed by his followers, which was in chapter 2, and yet this is no evidence that ever questioned or challenged the ideas of karma and reincarnation. At the same time, there is no evidence that he, as a part of the Shakya clan, who generally at least did not follow the Vedic principles or beliefs in karma or reincarnation as sun worshippers, believed in these either. Perhaps he did, and his response has been lost, or perhaps he thought them beyond reproach, or perhaps he found them to be practical answers for otherwise difficult questions. We will never know. Until then, I recommend acting as if it is true, Our intentional actions are the key to karma and potential reincarnation, if not liberation itself. In the simple practice here, Padmasambhava guides us to consider our actions and the cause and effect of our actions. He does not directly address reincarnation, but it is inferred from karma here. So this is number 16. Again, we said our intention, the refuge vow, and the stillness of body, speech, and mind, our breath. And then we say all actions have consequences. I will take care with all my thoughts, words, and deeds. Contemplate your previous actions and known consequences. Think about other potential consequences from unwholesome thoughts, words, or deeds. Vow to only engage in wholesome actions. And then pause to contemplate that. In this way, meditate continuously on cause and effect of your actions. And then afterwards, we recite the merit, and then for post-meditation, we continue to think about your actions and potential implications to those actions on you and others. So, I want to give you, I'm a little bit over time, but I want to give you real quickly a concise practice option. Once you become comfortable with the things that we've gone through, this is a very concise way of doing these as a practice. So you prepare as before with a deep breath, relax your brain and body into this flow of suchness. Suchness is a term that is used that is beyond words, if you will. And so in Buddhism, suchness, it means tathata in Sanskrit, refers to the direct experience of reality as it is, stripped of all conceptual, dualistic, or emotional projections and experience versus cognition. It is often considered to be the essential nature of phenomena and described as having no separate self, as being impermanent. Very consistent with the modern view of science. These lean towards a philosophical view, but are said to transcend even that. So more on that, and we'll learn more about that later. So some key descriptions for this: a synonym for ultimate reality, closely related to shunyata or emptiness, but provides a more positive description for the inherent radiant nature of reality. Beyond concepts is ineffable, meaning that it cannot be fully described in words or grasped by intellectual thinking mind. It must be directly experienced. This is kind of the irony of us now talking about it here and now. And then non-dualistic, it is a state free from subject, object, good, bad, or self, and other kinds of distinctions. Thusness means things are as they are right now. Connection to Buddha, Tathagata, is the root of Tathata is the root of Tathagata, the title for the Buddha, often interpreted as one who has arrived at suchness. And then profound insight into the nature of existence reduces suffering by fostering acceptance and eliminating the delusions of a fabricated reality. So the simple practice, homage to Samattabhadra and Samattabhadri, that's these figures right up here. The ultimate transcendent Buddhas, male and female, because life is suffered with hindrances or sufferings, impermanence and change, and all actions have consequences or karma. I suffer due to my own actions, knowing I will die and that I know I have the precious human life. I will now engage in virtuous actions for the belief of all sentient beings with great joy and devotion, with love and compassion for all. The core views and actions of a Buddha. So, I dedicate the merit of this practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. I dedicate the merit of this practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. I dedicate the merit of this practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. Thank you for being with us today. Let me know if you have any questions, and hope to see you again next week.